Welcome to this episode of E2 Talks. My name is Jay. If you're deciding which English language test to take, then this podcast is for you. In it, E2 experts Alex, Siley, and I talk about IELTS Academic, PTE Academic, and TOEFL. We compare the various tasks, discuss the ways in which you're scored, and talk about the pros and cons of each test. So if you're not quite sure which test is right for you, then take a listen. Hello. My name is Jay. I'm one of the expert teachers here at E2 Language, and I'm with IELTS expert Alex in the red corner.
Oh, that's me.
That's you. And I'm with TOEFL expert Siley in the navy blue corner.
Oh, and that's me.
And I'm over here in the PT Academic green corner. And today what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the pros and cons of each of these tests. And what else are we going to do? Just give you a bit of an overview.
Yeah, we'll just compare how each skill is tested
Yep.
across the various tests and look at the positives and the challenges for each one.
Okay, fantastic.
Maybe some tips in there.
Yep. So this would be really helpful for those of you who are undecided as to which test you will take, IELTS, PT, or TOEFL. So let's start with speaking. And maybe we'll start with IELTS. So Alex, what's just quick background of IELTS speaking and then a pos and a neg.
Well, IELTS speaking is one-on-one with a real human examiner in a room, takes between 11 and 14 minutes, and there are 3 parts to the test. Positives, I think that the human element is really positive. Both the tests you're going to talk about don't have that. And for some people, having a human there is really, really helpful. They can understand your accent in most cases. You can ask them to repeat something, ask them the meaning of a word. Challenge in the test, some of the topics are pretty unexpected. They can be pretty weird. So that is a challenge. When you're practicing, you're going to practice talking about things that you have probably never talked about in your life. But that can be fun in a way.
Let's talk about the human element. Siley, do you like talking to humans?
Not really, not a big fan. The other thing
Same.
is they can come back and ask you other questions that might throw you off.
Right, so it's interactive, isn't it?
Yeah, you gotta think on your feet.
We'll get to TOEFL, but TOEFL and PT Academic are not interactive. I've taken the IELTS 5 times, and the humans that I met were lovely. I'm quite sure they were humans, not robots.
Mostly. But the interesting thing is, even though they can ask you a follow-up question, in the IELTS, you're not marked at all on that your ability to interact or have a transactional conversation.
Really?
The way in the Cambridge tests where you're taking the test with another person, that's actually part of your score.
Yeah.
How you facilitate the other person. But IELTS, even though the human is there, they're sort of not there as well. Like
Right.
you're not judged on. You don't have to ask them a question, of course. So it's still very much a one-way conversation.
Do you think what will make candidates more nervous? Do you think speaking with a person in IELTS or speaking with a computer in TOEFL or PTE? What do you reckon?
Well, I reckon it depends on the kind of person you
Yeah.
are. What would I prefer? I'm pretty comfortable with both, but I do like the human element. I find that a bit easier. But in both cases, I think the mentality is that I'm delivering a performance here. I'm demonstrating something, whether that's to a human or to a computer. It's sort of the same in that way.
And you mentioned something about accents, and do you think what people, humans or computer algorithms, understand accents better? What if I do have a thick, Yiddish accent? Do people speak Yiddish still?
I guess.
Yeah. Well, maybe then we'll throw to the PTE, because that's something that comes up, don't you think, in the
Yeah.
PTE
Yeah.
critique.
It does.
And when it comes to humans, that's something the examiners are kind of taught. Like if I spend all day, every day teaching Japanese people, then
Yeah.
I'm really tuned into that accent, and that might affect the way that I mark them in their
Yeah.
test.
Yeah.
Whereas if I've never met somebody from Hungary, I might have trouble initially with that accent. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good thing and a bad thing, but the training should account for that, and you shouldn't reward an accent just because you're familiar with it.
Yeah. So, Siley, with TOEFL, Actually, no, let's talk about PTE because
Yeah.
it does use the algorithm and only an algorithm to mark speaking. So I guess a big question are there biases in the PT academic speaking algorithm, or are there biases in any algorithm? What do you think?
I guess it
Or is it
depends on the
pure?
I think it depends on the data that they've fed their system, right?
Right.
So I think PTE has been criticized in the past for that, but
Mhm.
I think they've sort of upgraded their system since then, and now I think they take different accents into account.
I think they actually built the algorithm off 100. I think it's 120 different language backgrounds. Obviously mixed genders, like mixed sexes, males and females. I can't remember the number of bits of data they fed through it, but it was like tens of
Enormous,
thousands.
yeah.
So it's pretty good, but it's still not perfect. But neither are humans. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, I'll do my little positive and negative for PT Academic. So the positive thing about PT Academic speaking is I like that you speak to a computer. I feel more comfortable. It's non-interactive, so I don't have to listen and respond. Although in retail lecture, I certainly have to listen and then speak. Negatives would be that I think describe image and retail lecture are very challenging tasks and require you really need to go in there having practiced them. You can't just, even if you're a native speaker, go in there and wing it. I
Yeah.
think that'd be problematic. Okay, TOEFL.
I personally think TOEFL has like the best of both worlds.
Biased.
Because you aren't actually speaking to a person, but at least one person will be marking your responses. So you are speaking to a computer where you can be sort of, more relaxed and not have to worry about what the other person is thinking of you. And then those responses are looked at by human examiners, so they do understand accents and like the structure and all of those things that I think algorithms kind of struggle with. So the structure actually, I think some of the PT tasks are also integrated and independent. So TOEFL is similar. You start off with an independent speaking task where they just ask you a question, you answer, and then the other 3 tasks, you're asked to read something,
Yeah,
then listen to something, and then speak about what you just read and listened to,
right.
which can be a little challenging. I think that would be a negative because very much like PTE, you only get a few seconds, so like 30 seconds to prepare, which is not a lot of time. That being said, I think the structure of that reading passage and that lecture that you listen to is sort of very rigid. So if you have practiced enough, you sort of know what that structure is going to be like,
Yeah.
and you can prepare in advance. So those 30 seconds are enough to sort of get your answers sorted.
Yeah, there's a real pattern to it, isn't there, which helps to, once you've identified that,
Yeah.
it's a bit easier.
And do you think the TOEFL tasks are like real world tasks? Is this something that you would encounter at university?
Yes, I think that's something that the TOEFL does really well, like throughout all of those different sections. All of the tasks mimic on-campus life, so like university living, and they're always related to like either being in a classroom or being on campus. So it is literally preparing you to go and study in a different English-speaking country.
What about IELTS? Are they real world sorts of topics and whatnot that you would find out there?
They are. I think that I agree with Siley that TOEFL, the sort of washback effect, the impact of TOEFL preparation helps your language development and also prepares you for university life in a more focused way than IELTS. But I do think IELTS and PTE, the preparation and those PTE tasks, they're really good for your language development, like dictation, listen and repeat. Even if you're preparing for another task, those are fun things to include and they're quite powerful little tools. But are the tasks what you will do in university in IELTS?
Alex,
No comment.
Do you like the rain? That's always my favourite IELTS question.
I mean, like all tests, I'm sure they've done their research, and I don't mean to undermine that at all. But one thing I would think, let's take the essay. Sorry, I'm way off topic, but the IELTS essay, that is not an essay that you're going to write at university. However, it probably is an essay that you would write to apply for university. Certainly somewhere like the US, where you have to go through that sort of application process. Then in that case, yeah, it does reflect a real world skill.
And to be fair, like the general and the academic both have the same speaking, right, for IELTS.
Yeah.
So they're kind of
Covers both.
trying to strike a balance there.
All right, let's move on and talk about the reading section of each of the tests. And maybe we'll switch around. We'll start with TOEFL. So can you give us a bit of background on TOEFL reading and a positive and a negative, Siley?
So in the TOEFL reading section, it's pretty standard, I think. You get 3 pretty long academic passages, about 700, 800 words long. And each of those passages is followed by 10 questions. So sometimes you might get 4 passages. Of those 4, one will be like they're just testing that question out, but you won't know which one. So you kind of have to do all of them with like equal, you have to focus on each of those equally, I guess. The positive, I think, is that unlike the other tests, in the TOEFL, most questions, they'll point out where the answer is, so in which paragraph.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Huge benefit.
Huge benefit.
Yeah, because that saves you a ton of time, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
trying to find where it is. And by the end of it, what happens is, like by the time you get through all those 10 questions, you've pretty much read the entire paragraph, and you can go back and review questions if you feel like, oh, I misunderstood that bit, but now I get it. And that is how people read in real life, right? Like you don't have to get it right the first time, but by the time you reach the end of the article and you feel like, oh, okay, now I understand this better.
Can we just quickly compare that to IELTS? Because IELTS doesn't tell you which paragraph to read. So how do you manage that, Alex?
And it, I guess the setup is sort of the same. You have a big text for academic reading anyway, and then IELTS you'll have 13 or 14 questions, but you have got no idea where those questions come from. There is some order to it. Some questions follow the text order, but it is to some extent a sort of scanning exercise to begin with. Where is it? Where is this? Where does this part begin? And TOEFL does that job for you, even with a little arrow sometimes. So
Yeah.
helpful, or it highlights a word, which just removes that element. So I think that does make the IELTS reading a bit more challenging. Well, different,
Yeah.
a bit different.
And more time consuming as well, I think.
Yeah. And you need to sort of understand how a text is structured to know where to expect things.
I think if you've done some IELTS prep, you know how it all works. It's very mysterious, all of these tests. And if you're listening to this at home and you're thinking, I'm not really understanding what they're talking about, you really do need to do a practice test paper. And then you get a real, you go, oh, I see. And I think IELTS or whatever is demystified once you sort of do a practice test and you go, right, I get it. So negatives about TOEFL reading. Go on.
Well,
Say something horrible.
I think it's a pretty good test, to be honest, if I haven't made it clear already. But I think time management is something that most students struggle with.
Yeah.
Despite knowing where the answer is, you sort of have to read carefully, and they are testing certain skills. And if you aren't prepared for that, you might end up spending a lot of time not being able to find the answer because you're just not prepared enough. But I don't think that that's something that you can't overcome. I think if you practice enough, it's a really good test.
I remember getting very fatigued in my TOEFL because it just felt like it went on and on.
They've shortened it now,
Have
though.
they?
Yes.
Wow.
It used to be nearly 4 hours
Oh my
long.
God, it was
I know.
like, it was never ending. But is that because they were testing what you talked before? You said there are some questions in there you don't actually get a score on. So they're just testing new questions, are they?
But they only do that in the reading and the listening section. And if you get a longer reading, you get the shorter listening. So you'll never have
See, they do it in PT Academic with the essay. Sometimes you must write 2 essays in PT Academic, of which only 1 is marked. And you don't know which one because they're testing the item.
Does IELTS do that?
No, interestingly. And I don't know. I mean, they must in some way. Perhaps they do their testing out of the live environment. But, I mean, OET does it as well, don't they? They put sample questions into the test, I believe. But IELTS, no, I think they only go live after they've been through very rigorous testing.
I think they recruit cohorts of students to try the tests on before the real test.
Yeah, I mean, it would go through several rounds of testing
It's a
and
bit
tweaking.
rude getting someone to write 2 essays.
I know, right?
Of which only one is marked.
And then, like you said, like, you know, if you get if you get the longer reading section, you might not do as well on the listening because you're so tired.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm sure they balance it all out somehow.
I guess they're training their algorithm
That's
off
right.
all those volunteers.
That's right.
Unwitting
right.
volunteers.
Okay, so IELTS reading.
Yeah, well, I'll just talk about academic reading. 3 big texts, each one 13 or 14 questions. All up, it's 1 hour, 40 questions in total. And the topics are, in the academic text, the topics are of an academic but not requiring specialist knowledge nature. You know what I mean. Okay, positive. Even though it's got a pretty bad reputation, some of the question types, true, false, not given, headings match, there's a lot of fear around those questions. I think once you've done them a couple of times, once you know what you're doing, it's not extremely difficult. I feel there's no ambiguity in the questions and the answers. Like, the answer is always there. You can trust that you're going to find it. There's always a really good reason why this answer is better than that answer. There's always a really good reason why it's false and not given, for example. So despite the fear around the test, I think that it's a very solid test. It's very rewarding once you figure out how the question types work and you can crack it yourself.
I think one critical thing here that people should remember if they're beginning their preparation is who to prepare with and what materials to use, because it is, as we know, as question writers for IELTS, or for E2 language IELTS, it's extremely difficult to write these tests properly. And if you just pull a practice test off the internet that somebody's made in their back shed, you know, it's going to cause more problems than do you good, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because there are weird questions out there and people ask us, what's this one, what's the answer? And often it's irrelevant because you would never ever see that question in the
That's
test.
right.
As we talked about, they go through an amazing amount of
They're engineering
testing and reviewing.
Those tests are just remarkably well engineered. Aren't
they're
Incredible.
They're perfect.
Yeah.
But on the challenging side, I think that, like TOEFL, the time and the length, it is quite challenging. Like, it's quite a daunting test, and if you're aiming high, then you need to be able to cope with reading a large amount of text in a pretty short time. So, yeah.
Okay, so PT Academic.
Bite-sized.
It's bite-sized. Unlike TOEFL and unlike IELTS, you're not doing a large reading passage. What did you say, 700 or 800 words?
Yeah.
See, in PT, the longest one you'll get will be 300 words, and that's really long. Most of them are about, say, 150 to 200 words. And there's lots more questions. So I really like that because you might get a reading text on physics and think, oh my God, I don't understand this. This question doesn't make sense to me. And the next one's about blowing up balloons. I don't know. It's probably still physics, isn't it?
But they wouldn't ever expect you to know something scientific.
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
So
No,
even
that's
if there
right.
are like
Well,
concepts.
actually, this is an interesting point because in PT Academic, you get a range of difficulty levels in the question. So you might do one question and go, woof, that was easy. And then the next one, you're like, oh my God, what's the answer to this one? Is that the case in IELTS and TOEFL? Range of difficulty levels?
It would be, but they would work that out by doing that prior testing, right? So they'd get, let's say, 100 people do the test, and they would know question 4, 90% of people get this correct, and therefore it's a band 4 question or something like that. And then they're discriminating items. So then there'll be the tougher ones where only 10% of people get that correct,
Are
and
they
hopefully
worth
that
more?
10% are the high. No, they're not worth more. They're all
They're
worth,
just- okay.
they're all worth 1 point,
Yeah.
but they're designed that way.
In TOEFL, only the final question is worth more points. Because it is longer and, it does require more work than the others because the other questions are pretty straightforward. But yeah, I agree. I feel like if it's difficult, and like a lot of students have found that difficult, sometimes if it's so difficult that only 1 or 5% of students get it right, they just throw it out because that's not a fair question.
Sure.
Yeah, because you don't want a test where 100% of people get 100%
Exactly.
of questions
Right.
correct. That's not going to help much.
Yeah. A negative of PT Academic reading is probably, I think the multiple choice, multiple answer question is challenging because it has negative scoring as well. Like it's a challenging question and it has negative scoring thrown in, which means that you get one right and one wrong because there are two answers. You get 0, in fact. So that's a bit of a challenge for people to sort of go, should I, shouldn't I? And if you're hovering like that, then you shouldn't, I think.
Do you think it's worth... I think the scoring is pretty complicated across PTE. It's really like it's impossible to mark it, to know exactly what the algorithm's doing. But do you think if I was preparing for it, should I know how much points each thing is worth, and should I consider that when I'm doing the test?
Well, a lot of people spend more time preparing for their English test doing the maths and reverse engineering the scoring than actually preparing for the test. Like we get actually I remember getting an Excel spreadsheet from an engineering student once who had spent all his time working out how the scoring worked instead of actually just learning methods and doing some practice and attending our live classes, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a stress response.
Yeah.
Going down rabbit holes.
Especially if you're a maths brain.
Yeah.
But you're right, the scoring in PT Academic is different because it uses integrated scoring. So that means that some of the tasks in the reading section will contribute points to your speaking, for example. And this doesn't happen in TOEFL or IELTS where they're separate. The listening only contributes points to the listening.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though TOEFL does have integrated tasks, they don't contribute to any of the other sections.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so now let's talk about the listening section for each test, and maybe I'll go first for this one. Okay, so positive aspect of PT listening is that, like all the other tasks, especially for reading, they are short. So we're talking about sort of 40 seconds of audio length, and then you might spend 20 seconds selecting the answer, and then you move on. And then it'll be an entirely new audio file on a totally different topic with a different speaker. And there's a good variety of question types. You know, there's gap fill ones. There's one where you have to click on words that are different to what the speaker says. There's a write from dictation one. So I like the variety of tasks as well. A negative thing is that they use authentic texts, that is authentic audio files taken from real life lectures. In fact, in one of mine, I heard Noam Chomsky speaking because I could hear his voice. And I was like, that's Noam Chomsky. And if you've ever listened to a real life lecture, of course you probably have, the speaker usually mumbles and stops and starts, and it's really challenging.
I think it does feel like a negative for a test taker because so much of language learning is spent with really unnatural text and audios. But again, that washback, the preparation for it, which forces you to listen to real English, to learn about the difference between spoken English and written English and connected speech, and those skills are so useful. And if I can segue from that into the IELTS listening.
Please.
Which is quite different. And TOEFL as well, like they are, from a test-taking point of view, if you put those two audios together, a PTE listening versus an IELTS listening, you will see a huge difference. IELTS listening, fully scripted, the speaker is speaking very carefully, much more carefully than a normal sort of natural speaker would. Normal natural speaker, is that the official word?
That works.
And in that sense, that's a benefit of IELTS listening. That I wouldn't say it's easy, but the audio is very clear. It's written. The questions are written to go with this script, so it's very easy to follow what's happening. And yeah, just basically 40 questions, 4 sections. 4 different situations. Negative side, challenging side, maybe the spelling factor, although I think all the tests have that, but the spelling, just a tiny spelling mistake.
Yeah, and what's spelling got to do with listening, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh, TOEFL doesn't have that because it's all multiple choice.
Oh, right, okay. So that's different. I wonder in the future if they'll change that, especially given spell check nowadays, that's everywhere, and in the writing as well. Is it so important now to spell a word correctly?
In writing, I can understand it, but spelling and listening, it's testing listening. And your brain doesn't spell words when you're listening. Does it? Mine doesn't.
No, I don't think so.
But again, there's research behind it, and that's the test. The test is the test. So again, a negative into a positive is as you prepare for the test, you are going to improve your spelling as well. So that's a good thing.
So TOEFL's multiple choice.
Yeah.
Actually, the whole reading is all multiple choice, and so is listening is all multiple. Oh, there's one last activity, isn't there?
Yeah, but that's also drag and drop. That is kind of multiple choice. So
Right.
you've got to choose
Yeah.
3 out of 6.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, even the listening is multiple choice. They do have one type of question which can have multiple choice, multiple answers. The rest only have like one correct answer.
Right.
I think TOEFL is very different on so many different levels. Firstly, unlike PT and IELTS, you don't get to see the questions before you listen to the audio. So you first have to listen to the audio, and then each question shows up one by one,
That's great.
and you can't go back.
But that's great. Because I tell you, I find multiple choice questions in listening really hard because you're listening and reading at the same time, and my brain can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, all right, imagine you're lying on the couch reading something, like really interested in this book, and somebody's saying, hey, excuse me, you have to stop reading to listen, and vice versa, right?
Yeah, and those options become a distraction to
Yeah.
you as you're listening. Whereas
Yeah.
TOEFL, well, as long as you've got a good memory or a good note-taking system,
Yeah, I think
you're better off.
you need to have really good note-taking skills to get through not just I think all 3 sections, like listening, speaking, and writing. You need to have like good note-taking skills, and you need to prepare in advance. But yeah, the listening also has 2 different types of audio. So they have lectures as well as conversations. So they try to make it like as real as possible. So whatever real life conversations or lectures you might encounter when you're at university. And each of those, so after each lecture, they'll ask you 5 questions, which pop up one by one.
Yeah.
And then after each lecture, you have 6 questions and 5 questions after each conversation.
So you're listening to the lecture and taking notes,
Yeah.
and then the questions pop up, and you have to use your memory and your notes to answer the question.
And they're pretty long. So the lectures are anywhere between 4 to 6 minutes. So you do have to take good notes.
Right, so it's some of the tasks in PT Academic require you to take notes as well, which is a skill.
Yeah, but like these lectures and conversations aren't like the PTE ones, they're not like supernatural. At the same time, they're not as scripted as IELTS. They are scripted, but they try to incorporate like, a spoken language
Right.
things into it. Like they'll use a lot
So
of
they're
connected.
faking it well.
Yeah. So they'll like force in sort of some idioms, or they'll force in some connected speech,
Right.
or something like that. So they'll
Okay.
kind of try and make it seem more conversational.
yeah, the conversations are more natural, I think, than the
Yeah.
IELTS ones. The language is more realistic.
Yes.
So, Siley, with the reading questions and the listening questions, they have like very discrete functions, right? For example, reading for a main idea, or reading for a detail, or reading for a purpose, or reading for an opinion.
Yeah.
And does it tell you what is the author? Is that in the question prompt? It's asking you that?
It's not in the question prompt, but the way that these questions are sort of framed, it's very easy to sort of tell what they're asking you. So sometimes they will explicitly ask you, what is the professor's opinion?
Right.
Or sometimes they'll just say, why does the professor mention blah, blah? And then you kind of have to say that because they want to support this point that they made earlier or something like that. So it is kind of different. But yeah, they do test like, very different skills. So they've got basic comprehension, pragmatic understanding,
Yeah.
connecting information, sort of like synthesizing, which I think is we do when we are just listening to sort of, take notes, or when you're in a lecture, you are doing all of those things.
A lot of that would be unconscious, though. We wouldn't
Yeah.
realize that we often listen for a purpose or listen for an opinion. It's quite nice that they make that so explicit. And I think that's when you're preparing on e2language.com, which you should do, we make that very clear what each question type is about, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. It's good. It's good to know that, especially just to improve your English listening skills or reading skills, to know what the text is about, what the function is. Yeah. So a negative for TOEFL listening?
I think that's the negative, that you can't really go back and change your answers.
Yeah.
But I mean, if
I read some research once that said that when you're doing a multiple choice question, often your first instinct is correct.
Really?
I don't know how they did this experiment. They must have got them to answer the question and then sort of said, okay, you can change it if you want. And actually they knew what their first answer option was. And then they found out that in fact, if you change it, you're often incorrect.
oh, maybe they are aware of that.
Yeah.
I think it's more though, like when we write the questions, that sometimes question 3 kind of gives you the
Yeah.
answer to question 2, or it refers back to question 2. So you can't go back and change it for that reason. Whereas IELTS and IELTS, they're completely independent. So that one question's not going to help you answer the question before it.
Yeah. And also I feel like when you're having a conversation in real life, you kind of can't go back, like, you know, and be
Yeah.
like, oh, you know what you said half an hour ago. I know a lot of times I feel like I should have said something, but I didn't.
Sounds like a fight with your boyfriend.
Oh, no. So yeah, I think something like that. It's just reflective of real world conversations. So I don't think that's necessarily like negative.
And what do you think about just having multiple choice questions for TOEFL? Do you think
I think that's really good.
think it's good?
I mean, they're just testing if you've understood something. At
Right.
the end of the day, that's what language is, communicating. If you've gotten the message that the other person is trying to transmit, that's it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it really matters.
Does it make it a bit boring for preparation though? I just say that because PT Academic I find is quite fun because there's such a variety of fun, in a way, like reordering paragraphs and reading.
I mean,
It's like a game.
but you're so stressed out when you're doing a test. Do you really want to keep like all of these different methods in mind, or do you just want to
True.
like go in and just know what's coming up next?
I agree. I think I think it works.
That seems like the philosophy of TOEFL. It's about like communicating and understanding, and that maybe that's a good segue into the writing test, where TOEFL rewards that, I think, more than maybe IELTS or PTE does.
Yeah.
They're not so much about, is it perfect? Is everything exactly accurate? It's more like, did you get it? Or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's talk about TOEFL writing. Then we'll start with TOEFL. So can you give us a background on TOEFL writing, and maybe also talk about the criteria? What do they mark your writing on? How do they mark it?
Okay, so there are 2 tasks in the writing section as well. So you've got your independent and integrated. So you start with the integrated actually, and again you get to read a 300 wordish paragraph, which is the reading, right, for PTE.
Yep, some of them are that long. Yep.
Yeah, so you don't get marked on that, but you still have to read a 300 word long passage, then listen to a lecture, about 2-minute long lecture on the same topic, and then you're sort of asked to synthesize that information and write sort of a summary, just highlighting the main points of difference, or, just pointing out the relationship between the points made in the reading and listening. So that, again, I think is something you definitely will have to do at university when you have to write like your assignments and like theses, and all of that does need you to do a lot of synthesizing. And yes, so the examiners are trained to sort of treat what you've written as a first draft. So they don't expect it to be perfect, and the criteria does say that minor errors are allowed, even to get like the highest score. I'll come to the criteria later. Let me just talk about the independent task, which is your traditional essay writing. I think all 3 tests have that. So there's just an essay. It has to be at least 300 words long, and you get 30 minutes to write that. With the marking, it's on a scale of 0 to 5. 0 is very rare. Like if you don't write at all, you don't make an attempt, or if you've sort of, just...
Do you mean 0 to 5 in total, or for each criterion?
For each criterion.
And how many criteria are there?
Actually, they don't really have criteria. They have bullet points,
Oh,
but there are total 4.
okay.
So if I just summarize what they're looking at, they're mainly looking at organization, so like the structure of what you've written,
Yeah.
your grammar and vocab, obviously, how you've connected your ideas, so kind of like cohesion and coherence.
Right.
And the final one is I think it's kind of like the IELTS task achievement, where like the rubric says that have you addressed the question and answered, the question that's been asked. So kind of like seeing if you've done what the question is asking you to do.
So what's a negative aspect of TOEFL writing?
I think the integrated one can be a little bit challenging for students, but like the speaking, they always follow a very tight format. So if you know that, you should be okay. I think one negative would be for the independent task. I think sometimes the questions are a bit like, not wacky, but they're kind of out there, and it would take you a while to sort of think of, oh, I've never thought of that. Like, if your government was building a monument, a national monument, whose statues should they build or something like that, and why? So they might ask you questions like that, and you'd be like, oh, I've never thought of that. Why would I want to, like, you might not even have an answer for it, but you have to sort of come up with something on the spot and write over 300 words on that.
Okay, so let's talk about IELTS writing, because that can be a big challenge for a lot of people. In fact, it tends to be the task or the part of the test that is marked most strictly when you look at the statistics worldwide. So Alex, maybe just why is that the case? Why do people struggle with IELTS writing?
I think it's just really about the criteria. There are certain things in the criteria that can affect your score more than people would expect. So, like certain points they make about grammar, things like the development of your ideas. And also the scale is 0 to 9, so that means like there is a lot of information included in the criteria sheet. Even the public version is quite hard for people to get across it. And you also, if you're aiming at 8, you need to get 8 in all 4 criteria, basically. You can't sort of have one big strength and then fall down in one area. So for most people, there's one or two things that they really need to work on, and one or two things that are pretty easy for them. But yeah, once you know the criteria, that's one thing. But it's also quite tough when it comes to grammar and vocab. So more so, I think, and tough's maybe not the right word, but like if I can understand everything someone's writing, I get it, no problem, but I notice the errors, even though those errors don't affect their communication, probably not going to score 7. And that's what a lot of people want, 7. And there might be just minor errors everywhere. And I think that's what the struggle ultimately is from a language point of view. How do you write in a sophisticated way with minimal errors? And yeah, there's quite a heavy focus on the accuracy when it comes to IELTS writing.
Yeah. I feel like when you're writing an IELTS essay, you really have to juggle the criteria and really keep them in mind while you write. Let me get this right. So with the criteria, let's say you get 8, 8, 6, 8.
Oh, don't ask me maths.
Does that mean you get a 6, or do you get an average of 7?
You get an average. So they put them all together, 8, 8, 8, and 6. They add it up together. They divide it by 4, but then it won't round up. So if your score comes to like 6.75, let's say, it'll go down to 6.5.
Okay.
That's good in one way because it forces you to improve accuracy and vocab and grammar and so on. But there is a real tendency for people to get fixated on the idea of complexity or complicatedness, and also this idea of like the more wild words I can throw into my essay, the more sort of academic chunks that I can throw in, the better. And that's a terrible thing about IELTS preparation, that it can often lead to desperate measures like that. Whereas really, as an examiner, I do just want to follow what you're saying clearly. I want to understand what you mean. I want you to explain it to me in a logical way. I don't want all that extra sort of fluff, and I think that can be a real distraction and a real problem in preparation.
Agree.
And I should just explain very briefly what IELTS writing involves. There are 2 tasks. Task 1 is either write a letter or describe a graph. Task 2 is write an essay, like the other tests. I've talked a bit about the challenging side of it, but the positive side of it, and maybe people won't appreciate this until they've finished IELTS and they are living their best life post-IELTS, but preparing for the IELTS writing test will improve your language skills. Like, it definitely does. You learn how to write sentences correctly. You learn how to use punctuation. And when you're applying for a job or you're writing a letter to someone, that stuff really matters. And so I think that's all the language tests build on that. But I think the fact that IELTS candidates spend so long working on writing, they do really improve, and that has a long-term benefit.
I think there's genuine reason why you should take your preparation seriously and try to improve your writing, not just try and hack the algorithm or hack the test. Because when you eventually do, land in Australia and you are applying for a job, people are pretty critical with grammatical errors and stuff in emails for jobs. I mean, as an English teacher, if I'm employing English teachers and I see a punctuation error, that's it. They don't get the job. But that's probably a different story. But people still are pretty critical with language. So it's a good reason to improve your skills all around.
So I can't hack the PTE writing?
That's a great question. Well, a lot of people talk about templates, using templates.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that in IELTS, for example, like an examiner can just spot a template a mile away, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Can the PTE academic algorithm spot a template? I think they probably can. I'll tell you why. It's because the templates leave little room for content. Because they're basically something that you memorize and you fill a gap just with keywords. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're flexible enough to answer the question properly. And I don't know exactly, to be honest, but I think the algorithm's smart enough to know whether this thing is actually written on, it is smart enough to know whether it's written on topic or not. So memorizing templates is a bad idea.
And what a waste of time as well, all that math.
That's the big thing. Like, imagine going into an exam and trying to memorize, let's say the essay's 200, your template's 250 words, memorizing 250 words. It's like memorizing lines for a play or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crazy idea. Put massive stress on you.
And I'm sure the algorithm is looking especially for topic-specific stuff, ideas and language chunks. So if the essay is about animals and it sees that 80% of the text is about other stuff, those template words, and every now and then there's the word animal, well, that's not going to score well. Like, if you've got a rich, varied language to talk about animals or talk about space, it'll reward that, I would imagine. Yeah,
and I'd like to think that, the owner of the test, Pearson, would probably sort of find out when templates are being used. And, machines are pretty smart. As soon as they find out that there's this template being used, it could just penalise you for that. In fact, in PT Academic, if you write off topic, you don't just get a 0 for content, you get a 0 for the entire essay. Which is, it probably happens in IELTS too, right? What happens if you get a memorized essay?
0 in writing.
0.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same with TOEFL.
Same for PT Academic. You get 0, nothing. So yeah, memorizing templates is crazy.
I mean, I can see why test takers are kind of, they are anxious about the test and maybe they don't think they can write on the spot. So I get why they want to learn templates, but what's better is just learning the structure of how to structure your essay. What are you going to say next? How to develop ideas. Exactly. I think that is something that students need to know rather than just, learning these sentences by heart. Because essentially that's what the structure is doing. It's telling you what to say next, but not the exact words. The words are yours.
Right.
And I think that you're right. Like, by now they can, all the tests can tell these templates apart, and you are going to risk getting a 0. It's just not worth that risk.
I agree. Structures are important. How to structure up your introduction. Once you sort of go through a live class with us and we teach you how to structure an introductory paragraph, a body paragraph, it's like, oh, okay, I don't really even have to memorize that. It just sort of makes sense that that's how a paragraph should be. So a bit of background on PT Academic writing is that, well, there are only 2 tasks in the writing section that contribute points to your writing: summarize written text and write essay. So one is an essay, an argumentative essay, and one is where you read a paragraph of text and write a very short summary, a single sentence summary. But there are actually 4 other tasks that contribute points to your writing that come from listening or reading, etc. Positive thing about the essay in PT Academic is that it is always argumentative persuasive. So there's a controversial topic, cigarette smoking or something, and you're either for it or against it, and you argue for it or against it. And unlike IELTS, I'm not sure about TOEFL, but IELTS I know has a range of different question prompts. Do you want to just talk about that range?
Yeah, there are some common ones that you'll see, but really the way that we teach is you just forget about that. But definitely there's not just one type of essay, but you're going to get a particular question on test day, and it may be one question, it may be a 2-part question, a 3-part question, it may be opinion plus solutions, it may be predict the future and offer an idea for something, whatever it is. Yeah, you have to answer, and that is a huge part of scoring as well. Have you answered that question?
I think where people muck up in their IELTS too is that they memorize the question prompt answers. They'll go in with an advantages, disadvantages type of essay in their mind, and the question will ask them about problem solutions. They write about advantages, disadvantages, and you'll be whacked, right?
Yeah, and it's actually very liberating to just think of the question as the question and to not worry what kind of question is, what kind of question this is, and how does that inform how I write it. That is stressful, because I've read topics and felt like, I don't know how would I label this question, but it absolutely doesn't matter what label I stick on it. It's just, you can see the questions that are there, the elements, the important words, and that's what you deal with. So there's no need to, as you said, structure is important. If you can structure an intro, if you know how to write body paragraphs, and there is a very, a convention for that everybody in the world, basically, in English tests and essays, everyone follows these same structures. It's not something radical. If you know how to do that, you can put together any essay.
Yeah, I agree. So a negative for PT Academic Writing, I think, is that the final task of the entire test, which comes in the listening section, is called Write from Dictation, and it contributes points to listening and writing. And if you run out of time because you haven't managed your time properly and you miss a few of these Write from Dictations, it seems to affect your score quite drastically. So that's definitely a negative. So you've got to have good time management skills in listening to make sure you finish all of the Write from Dictations. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go to our corners of the boxing ring, the red IELTS corner, the navy blue TOEFL corner, and the green PT Academic corner. And we're going to say what we think is best about these tests and fight it out. Okay, so we'll start with IELTS. What's the best thing about IELTS? Why should somebody take the IELTS test and prepare for the IELTS test?
Well, I think what some people would consider a negative about IELTS is actually a really big positive, and that is the variety of topics that you'll deal with as you're preparing and when you're in the test. So you will, part of IELTS preparation, you're probably going to be reading and talking and writing and listening about farming and travel and family and education and public transport, all these different things. And ultimately that is really good for your language skills. At the end of your IELTS journey, you pop out a wonderfully rounded member of the English speaking world. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff you'll learn along the way. That's why you should do IELTS and an IELTS preparation course in particular.
TOEFL.
Like I said earlier, I do think TOEFL is the best test all around because it is preparing you for real world skills that you definitely will need when you're at university. And also I feel like it's the speaking and the writing scoring, it's not as punishing as IELTS. I mean, they are kind of easygoing with few errors here and there. And when you are preparing for it, you're working on your note-taking skills, you're working on your writing skills, synthesizing. All of these things, I feel like they'll really make your time at university a lot easier once you're at university, rather than, just preparing for a test and then that being irrelevant to what you do at uni.
Very good. Okay, so I think that PT Academic is the best, and you should prepare for PT Academic because the preparation is actually really fun. Because there are lots of different tasks in PT and they're really short, you can look at it almost like a bit of a game. It's like a Sudoku puzzle. So that's one part. The other part is I like that the texts are authentic. They come from real life lectures and real life, academic papers, etc. So like what Saili said about TOEFL, it'll be good prep for you if you are entering university, or it will just expose you to lots of different interesting academic topics.
I think IELTS preparation is really fun as well.
I agree. I think we make it at E2 Language. I actually think we make the most boring thing in the world, preparing for an English test, fun. I think that's really one thing we do well in our live classes and in the group classes. I really think we do. I think our videos are quite fun to watch. Yeah, well, that's debatable.
No, but I do feel like you get this high once you've figured out, how the whole thing works. So once you've figured out what the person who wrote the question is trying to do, what the distractors are trying to do, and then you get the right answer. I feel like it's very rewarding, at the end.
Yeah.
When you can master that. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people who pass their tests with E2 Language actually come back and join the live classes, not only to tell us their wonderful scores, but just because they actually like the live classes, which is testament to how wonderful our teachers are and how good our content is, etc. Anyway, that's enough from moi. Anything else?
I think we pretty much covered it all.
Yeah. And if you don't love preparing for a language test, just remember it's not going to last forever.
That's right.
With good preparation, you will pass your test and you hopefully will never have to deal with it again.
Yes.
And the rest of your life is ahead of you. But yeah, in the meantime, as you prepare, keep positive.
Do it properly.
Treat it like it's fun.
Do it properly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it will be over before you know it.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so hopefully now you're well and truly informed about which test is best for you. Remember that if you need help preparing for your English test, no matter which test you choose, we have you covered at E2 Language, the world's most popular English test prep website.